In my lectures, I employ a short segment of CBC's Canada People's History, usually about 8 minutes, one chapter. I think it's a sin to use more than that. It would put me to sleep, for one thing. But they have merits. For one thing, they demonstrate to students that Canada is worthy of big budget cultural production, which is something you've got to get over with them. My students, 90% of them, really appreciate the use of this 6 to 8 minutes, and I get the response at the end of every year that this was fantastic, and it's been that way for 7 years. 10% of them hate it. Absolutely cheesy. Can't stand the music, can't stand the actors, and so on. But I figure for the 90% it works, and the 10% will always say, what the hell, it's just a waste of 6 or 8 minutes, and we get on with the class, and that's fine. Beyond the effectiveness of the big budget scene setting, and I think it is effective, as I say, for most, the film offers another version of primary and secondary sources, and so that's what I drive home. Riel stands in the dock, speaking the words recorded during his 1885 trial. Agnes MacDonald speaks the words she actually wrote to a correspondent about receiving the news of D'Arcy McGee's assassination. In each case, the actor communicates emotions with the authority that comes both from the original text and from the dramatic arts. And it's the fact of that communication of emotion that I think is important, but also that it's a primary source. It's the two things that matter. And behind the visuals, finally, there's two things: music, cheesy for 10%, interesting for the rest, and the narrative itself. Mark Starovich said that he had hired, quote, God's secretary, because he didn't want a man who was too authoritative. Now there's a gendered statement. But he wanted, therefore, not God, but God's secretary. The idea being that people would see this as contestable, able to be contested. And of course, the narrative is always worthy of contesting. God knows, mostly for what it leaves out as well as for what it touches on. The larger point of my lecture, though, is not that 8 or 10 minutes, but to establish a context for the students' reading. Like most of my colleagues, I try to explain what Ken Osborne argues is essential in every secondary school history course, if not the rest. That is, the big ideas that link the trees into forests. The, quote, big ideas. And I went through the lectures, my files, to see what are the ideas. And here are the ones that I come up with in that term, or at least most of them, not all. The meaning of gender, democracy, the state, French and British in North America, Aboriginal experience, ethnicity, political parties, unions. And then colon, the second, the kind of classic generalizations that every student should have at this level. Innes's on staples and transportation routes, Marx on class, Turner on the frontier. And then thirdly, the pattern of Canadian historical writing in the 20th century. So you move from responsible government to economic forces to biography to social history to the social constructivists of today. So those are the big ideas that I'm trying to get across in the course of 13 weeks, 26 lectures in a survey of Canada up to Confederation or sometimes post-Confederation. Now, what's interesting is that the last list of things, these concepts, these problems, these themes, are the stuff of historians' conversations. They constitute a language, the manner in which the practitioners of the discipline have been able to grasp the past and communicate its meaning to their colleagues. These concepts are our math, to go back to Eric Vogt. Now, last point, how am I doing for time?
5 minutes.
Okay, she's giving me more than I really deserve, but I'll take 3. My point would be, this is a very specialized language. I would argue that you only at the secondary and primary level want wee bits of it. You want some of the big ideas only. To try and tackle all of them, of course, would just be far beyond what you could do in any given course. If you could tackle 2 or 3 or 4, that would be great. But it's the primary source part that you can use. And so my focus, I think, if I were teaching secondary and primary students, would be the finding of the source through which to teach. You know, every year I spend a week or so finding that primary source that I can use as a base for my students' reading, to get them into another person's head. And that's what's interesting about the cenotaph assignment and that Civil War cartoon. You're getting the students into somebody's head in the past and making them confront it for a while. Now, for me, it has to be a book of 100 or 150 pages because I want the students to work on reading and critical analysis of a long text and so on. I assume that in junior levels, you're going to deal with 2 and 3 pages of document, perhaps. But the point is, it's the text that matters. And so I worry about the benchmarks, because I think if you spend all your time worrying about these very advanced and specialized problems, cause and consequence, for example, you're going to lose the really important question, which is wonder. Getting people amazed by stories unlike one's own time. So that's my confession of worry. The other comment is just to take the one concept, cause and consequence. E.H. Carr in 1961 put a real point on, boy, we've got to understand cause in history. Man, that's what history is all about. We've got to understand causation. Well, there's a new book, 5 years old now, What is History Now? David Cannadine edited it. There are 12 essays in it, and 3 of the essays take direct shots at that idea of history as a study of cause and causation. In fact, Cannadine himself says, no, it's not cause and causation. It's meaning and understanding. We've moved from causes to meaning. We've moved from explanation to understanding. In other words, the professional conversation has moved on. Not that it's necessarily lost the other, but every time you try and pin something like a discipline to the wall, it's going to move. And so it's already moving back to the primary source and a little few big ideas.
Thank you, Jerry.